you all so much for joining us. Sorry for the delay. We had a little bit of technical difficulty with everyone being able to hear each other, which is important in an event like this. We should all listen and be able to hear each other. But thank you all so much for coming to Left Bank Books Presents Online, Jabari Asim, in conversation with Shiraz Gorman. Jabari will be celebrating his new book of poetry, Stop and Frisk, American Poems. We are so happy to be able to bring this event to you. This is just an incredible event with two very wonderful St. Louis poets, well, former in Jabari's case. But this event will hopefully change your world and make the world a better place. Hopefully it will bring you some joy in a time when there are so many things going on. But we are very happy at Left Bank Books to be celebrating 51 years. We are offering curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. So you can order a very special copy of Stop and Frisk to be picked up or to be sent out to you. And this is a very special copy, and a portion of the proceeds from the book are going to the Equal Justice Initiative of Montgomery. So that is another very important aspect of tonight's event. When you purchase a copy of the book from Left Bank Books, your money stays here in St. Louis. It helps us keep our doors open. It helps us make it through the pandemic. So we thank you all so much for your support. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. And now I would like to turn this over to a part of our fantastic team, Chris Kleindienst, who is co-owner of Left Bank Books, who will introduce Jabari and Shiraz.
Okay, so I was going to say all that stuff Shane said too, so I wasn't sure when he was going to stop and when I was going to start, but here I am, and it's really thrilling to be here because I adore both of these people. Jabari and I go way back. This is a really great bringing together of some excellent St. Louis talent, and that's one of the strange things about COVID. Shiraz and I were talking that it's like, this is not the greatest situation. You don't get to sort of be in person and have that experience with authors. However, we get to see authors in conversation with folks that we would never have had the resources to do otherwise. And some pretty special things like tonight can happen as a result. So, in case you don't know, Shiraz Gorman is a St. Louis-based writer, storyteller, and public speaker, creating poetry, essays, photography, film, and music. As well, she is a community-centered social entrepreneur devoted to the visibility, care, and healing of underserved people. Shiraz is a recipient of the 2018 St. Louis Visionary Award for Outstanding Working Artist. Congratulations on that. That's pretty fabulous. She has 2 TEDx talks under her belt and 1 book of poetry, In the Midst of Loving, which we have available. And I can tell you personally that this amazing list of talents doesn't begin to describe her power when she gets behind a microphone. It is also just really wonderful to be able to celebrate Jabari Asim's new book of poetry, Stop and Frisk, with him in this St. Louis-based virtual setting. I don't know how many people out there sitting in somewhere other than St. Louis. I worked with Jabari way back when he was part of the New Voices, New Worlds, First Civilizations, and Eugene B. Redmond's Writers Group. And I was part of Left Bank Books, still am. His group produced forever and ever. His group produced readings of up-and-coming authors like Edwidge Danticat and Sapphire, and Left Bank Books helped promote them and sold the books. And we also had some pretty swell times at after parties. So Jabari, we did. Jabari is pretty many wonderful things. Former editor and in chief of The Crisis magazine, former deputy book review editor at the Washington Post, former book editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship in Creative Arts, and the author of 7 books for adults, including We Can't Breathe, On Black Lives, White Lies, and the Art of Survival, an incredible book, and 10 books for children, also quite wonderful. and his poems are included in several anthologies. So please give a lot of little hearts in your screens or whatever you can do. Clap virtually for these wonderful people. We're going to have a great conversation tonight.
Awesome. So thank you so much to Shane and Chris for this opportunity to get together with you, Jabari. So let's go ahead and kick it off with some readings of your work.
Yeah. First of all, let me just give a quick thank you to Shane and Chris and you. It's always nice to participate in an event in one's hometown. You know, I'm North Side, born and raised in St. Louis. And also, you and I met at an event sponsored by Left Bank Books. So, you know, so there's a lot of symmetry that I appreciate and I'm grateful for. And, you know, before we get into conversation, I will read a few poems from the book, maybe 15 minutes, maybe a few minutes more. Don't want to wear out my welcome, and also leave some room for talk. I don't typically explain the poems or introduce them. I just give the title, and then I do the poem. And you know, if we want to, we can talk about the genesis or the poems, the history behind the poems afterwards. So I'm going to get started now. The first poem is called 1,000 Chokeholds from Now. 1,000 chokeholds from now, Black and brown people will cross at the corners. They will refrain from heaving rocks at panes of glass and stop grilling meat on the sidewalks. 1,000 chokeholds from now, they will stop dancing in subways. They will decline to sell individual untaxed cigarettes. They will not climb from car wrecks to seek assistance. They will not resist arrest by holding on to the hems of their skirts. 1,000 chokeholds from now, Black and brown people will no longer insist on access to taxis. They will not step into elevators when white women are already inside. They will wait patiently at Best Buy when a snot-nosed kid checks and double checks their receipts. 1,000 chokeholds from now, windows will not be broken and neither will heads. Cities will be clean and safe for lovers of local lager, artisanal pickles, and the hipsters next door. 1,000 chokeholds from now, James Q. Wilson won't be nothing but the name of an endowed chair at the American Enterprise Institute, paid for by State Farm, because like a good neighbor, they're always there. The talk. It's more than time we had that talk about what to say and where to walk, how to act and how to strive, how to be upright and stay alive, how to live and learn, how to dig and be dug in return, when to concede and when to risk, how to handle stop and frisk. Keep your hands where they can see, and don't reach for your ID until they request it quite clearly. Speak to them politely and answer them sincerely. The law varies according to where you are, whether you're traveling by foot or driving a car. It won't help to be Black and proud, nor will you be safer in a crowd. Keeping your speech calm and restrained. Ask if in fact you're being detained. If the answer is no, you're free to go. If the answer is yes, remain unfazed to avoid being choked, shot, or tased. Give every cop your ear, but none your wit. Don't tempt them to fold, spindle, mutilate, hit, or otherwise cause pain to tendons, bones, muscles, brain. These are things you need to know if you want to safely come and go. But still, there is no guarantee that you will make it home to me. Despite all our care and labor, you might frighten a cop or neighbor whose gun sends you to endless sleep, proving life's unfair and talk is cheap. The disappeared. Every portrait posted on the Black and Missing website looks like someone I know. Last seen in parking lots and on porches, at work, leaving church, heading to class, rolling cross country to visit friends. 64,000 mostly missing in New York, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland, and Florida. Signs of struggle, prints wiped clean, empty cars with engine. So many women, so little news. All these Americans the thin air has swallowed. No Chandras, Kayleys, or Natalies among them. Phoenix, Shani, Arnika, Sharon, Tilana, Latoria. How your smiles stay with us, your winning gleam. In Chile, the mothers and wives of the disappeared would dance in protest at the government gates. How shall we announce our scars and fractures, our sustained despair? I dream of a drumbeat summit, millions of men stepping and sliding in electric syncopation, a train of souls whirling beyond the White House fence. This is called So You Think You Can Dance. Me and rhythm tight as Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike, turning and sliding in one smooth move, telling a packed house of screaming girls to cool it now. My father's always going on about New Edition, Ralph's street slick falsetto, and Johnny G's rumbling like a natural man. I just tell him, Pop, it hurts me to say it, but New Edition is old edition now. Bobby barely moving these days, looking like he needs a hip replacement, and not a single one of them feeling stupid enough to try a split. Me and my boy Andrew know all the ancient history. Pop say, you can't break the rules unless you know them. So when we not dancing, we on YouTube, checking out the tradition. Early mornings, we get on up like the godfather of soul, stretching and soaking up MJ, popping that crazy rod and dancing machine, his brother's shrink-proof afros bobbing behind him, the Temps, necktied and double-breasted, showing young America they ain't too proud to beg. The Nicholas brothers taking folks to school, jump and jive. We got all that in our bones by the time we reach First Avenue. Leap up and ask the strap hangers to clear the middle. Not much room to moonwalk on the A train, so I take to the air. We're formally trained, Andrew explains, both graduates of the MTA Academy, where we majored in rhythm and minored in flight. I'm upside down quick as a nick, curling my ankles around the chrome and letting my body say what words can't. Tourists whip out iPhones while others look through us, like we clear as the air they hope will swallow us up as we pass through the populous city. I know those types. Sooner or later, the rhythm is gonna get them. Andrew hasn't even passed the hat before 4 plain clothes pop up and place us under arrest. The foreigners think it's part of the show as they turn and slide us through the doors. This is called Wild Things. 2 minutes half naked in the company of at least a dozen men with guns does things to your mind. Each minute becomes 1,000 years. You think of headlines and history. Your great grandmother raped by white men with guns on the dirt floor of a barn. What she remembered most were those who stood and watched, doing nothing, while the horses turned away in shame and disgust. Men with guns, men smelling of sweat and desperation pounding on my door. I tried to close it, but they were too strong. A dozen men against one woman, yanked into a hallway of noise, nightmare, lights, screaming cops, and yelling neighbors. My towel tugged away, leaving me in underpants, a scrap of fabric between me and the grasping hands of strangers. My bare body pushed and pressed into the cold and unforgiving wall, begging to be let go, praying for mercy and darkness to hide my dark, naked self from the eyes of strange men with guns, looking me up and down as they go up and down the stairs. Not one man handing me my towel to cover my breasts. Married for 16 years, and 10 went by before my husband saw all of me. my oxygen beyond reach, the space tight as the hold of a ship. Eyes, hands, breath, mean men pressing against me, squeezing while the good men watch. A neighbor shouts, "Y'all wicked," as the 4-year-old goes down in a cloud of spray. One man's sour breath on my neck, hard against my back, his fingers in my mouth. Men with many eyes, hands, taking up my air. Neighbors in the stairwell with cameras say I fainted and fell to the floor. The good men stood all around, all around. The good men stood all around. This is called Warning Contains Graphic Violence. Attention all units. Black woman walking eastbound on I-10 near the La Brea on-ramp. Approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, 135 pounds, early 50s, answers to grandma. Wearing a pink dress and appears to be armed with a purse. If you encounter the suspect, she may resist by walking slowly away. Throw her on her back and squeeze her between your thighs. Raise your fist high and punch her face until she is still. She may resist by continuing to breathe, in which case, raise your fist high and continue to punch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Is she still moving? Punch her again, again, again. Be advised that this is a high-risk pursuit. Lucy's. On certain street corners, a man can scare up a cigarette for just $1. Enough Lucy's over time can be hazardous to health, as deadly as breaking up a fight in an intersection crowded with witnesses or dashing through drizzle for Skittles and tea. Risks aside, they are a staple of urban commerce, a gross domestic product that helps the underground economy go. Picture Boy Willie and his watermelons, Bearden's bejeweled fishmongers bartering amid a splash of paint. But a black man in the middle of the night knows better than looking for Lucy's beyond his own driveway. Safer instead to root around the glove box for that precious planned ahead pack. Later, he'd say it felt like a firing squad when deputies opened up from behind, leaving him not only smokeless, but 60 years old and shot in the leg. Suspected of stealing his own car in front of his own house, he thought his neighbor was joking when he heard a command to put his hands in the air. And this is called The Kind That Scares You. I am black and staggerly, dark-knuckled and nappy. Seeing me walk the streets made much of Florida unhappy. I'm the ghost of your criminal past, your easy alibi. I'm black and poor in Florida, where justice goes to die. Accused of 7 robberies, I denied them all. They say I fired a weapon, but they saw nobody fall. Tell the judge I'm underprivileged. I need therapy instead. I'm bipolar after all, and no one's hurt or dead. Way down south in Dixie, break the heart of me. Poor boys go to jail. Rich boys go free. This is the last poem. It's called Reckoning for Renisha McBride. Mournful horns right here, deep thrum of bass. Mournful horns right here, deep thrum of bass. A stone's throw from Motown, Hitsville, USA, the sound of America eating its young. Renisha reeling, head full of fire, wreck and ruin behind her. Theodore Wafer, 55, home alone with a shotgun and a cell phone. I thought they would hurt me. I thought I could scare them off. They. Underage, under the influence, 19. Wafer investigates through a locked screen. He sees nothing but night. I would not cower in the face of this awful blackness, this dark mistake, this sable error, this dusky neck, too distant to strangle but close enough to shoot. I would not cower, I would not. Swing the bottom electric, lighten the brass for a few beats. Step it up some. Junior walk joints, a burst of inappropriate funk. Shotgun, shoot him before he runs now. Full of piss and vinegar, I unlocked my door and stepped outside. White humor, white Christmas, white comedy, white lights, white out, white lines, white cloud, white tornado, white lightning, white privilege, white rights. He has her in his sights. No more odes for the Confederate dead. Let's grieve for Renisha instead. All the Renishas, the broken sisters crushed to dust and bone in our neighbors' tangled pathologies. Weep for their sparkling promise, their incandescent love. Mossberg, pistol grip. His tragic story of accidents suddenly changes to self-defense. Nothing that night went the way he planned. Wafer wipes a tear on the stand. Horns, more mourning. Come on in and blow now if you want to. We're through. Wreck and ruin. Deep thrum of bass. I think we'll end it right there.
Ooh, everybody, take a moment to give a virtual round of applause for Mr. Jabari Asim. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, when we talked yesterday, I told you my response to that poem was the harmony and horror of it all.
You sound like a poet. Respond to poetry with poetry. I know how that is.
Yeah. So my first question for you, when creating a body of work like this, what do you lose and then what do you gain?
Well, as you're working over it, what you really risk losing is a certain immediacy, a certain freshness from when you're first encountering these things through your poetic gaze. And what you gain at the end, hopefully, is something you've made. Making a poem is an act of making. And so there's this satisfaction from having made something, but there's also, if you're lucky, if things work out right, there's a sense of emotional enrichment too, because it's helping you to deal with some very challenging realities, right? Years ago, I read Gordon Parks's memoir, A Choice of Weapons. It was my brother-in-law's copy, and he talked about things he could do with his camera. He could express his frustration, his dissatisfaction with injustice in a number of different ways, but he chose the camera. And I chose language, or language chose me, however you look at it, right? So that's a long and circular answer to a very good question, but hopefully, shed some light on the process.
Oh, no, definitely. It truly does. Because you exist at a very interesting intersection, where you are a journalist, you are a playwright, you are a poet, you're a fiction and nonfiction writer. However, I would like to speak on the intersection of where you are with journalism and poetry, because your work is just extremely visual and vivid. And I'll be honest with you all, I told Jabari, and I made a mistake. I start reading this book one night, and I got halfway through the book, and it was like, whoa, because all of these things started to resurface. Like I could literally see the videos of some of the cases that you address in this book. And I just want to talk about the importance of being recorders of history as poets, and your approach as a poet with a background as a journalist?
Sure. I mean, I think of myself as a recorder of deeds, right? I'm not necessarily claiming to um, convey wisdom or a certain specialized perspective. I just kind of want to get the information down, no matter what genre I'm working in. And from a larger perspective, um, I'm very engaged in what I call narrative combat, the clash of stories, right? And so I'm always looking at who's telling the story, and what is the relationship between the the subject of the story and the teller of the story. And these are usually power relationships, right? So as Black people who are frequently marginalized and oppressed, we have to be wary of who gets to tell the story of our experience. And in many of these instances, the official narrative or the state narrative or the narrative that journalists often uncritically accept, uh, many journalists, not all, uncritically accept, is the state's version of things. The state's version of things usually is the police incident report. And there's probably no more fallacious document in American culture than police incident reports. Many times the journalists report uncritically a particular instance, say, in which a Black person has been killed or brutalized, and then we see video, and then we get eyewitness reports that absolutely counter that official narrative. And so, as a writer, I want to make sure that I'm being faithful to the story, particularly the story of my people, without apology, right? That is the gaze. My gaze is critical, but at the same time, I'm understanding these power relationships underneath how these stories are told, and I think that plays out in the poetry. And I think the visual aspect that you talked about, um, I'm also trying to do that. I am trying to paint a picture. I'm trying to react to these things that I've seen through the medium that I'm most comfortable with, which is language. I have visual artists in my family. My father's an artist. My brother was an artist. My father was an art teacher for many years at Beaumont High School on the North Side, and so I had a lot of exposure to the visual world. Those are not my particular gifts, but I've tried to be faithful to the way in which I was raised. Again, through the medium of language, because that's the medium I work with best.
Yeah, and which leads me to my next question, which I thought was really interesting in our conversation yesterday, um, was that your works are in conversation with one another. However, I also noticed that you pulled another ancestor into this work. You pulled in Gwendolyn Brooks as well. So, how important is it for your works to be in conversation with one another and for you to also pull in the inspiration and spirit, quite honestly, of people like Gwendolyn Brooks?
Yeah, I mean that's really important to me. And Gwendolyn Brooks was pivotal in my own development. It was a Gwendolyn Brooks appearance at my college many years ago that led to the epiphany, in which I realized that I was supposed to be a writer. I was sitting a few feet from Gwendolyn Brooks when that happened. And I had to go and call my parents and say, "I'm changing my major. I'm going to be a writer." They were like, "Oh my God, is he hanging with the wrong people? Is he experimenting with controlled substances? What's going on here? Why is he doing this?" Blame it on Gwendolyn Brooks. But so yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that whenever I'm writing something, I'm entering into a conversation that has already begun. That's really important to me, and I think if you enter that way, you you're you're motivated in part by a spirit of humility, which I think is really important. When I first got into writing, I would sometimes, enter the arena as if what I was saying was new. It's rarely new. It's usually a continuation of something that's already begun. And once I realized that, I'm at the point now where I don't have to remind myself, really. I know, right? But still, it's
Right.
important. Hey, dude. You think this poem is tight. Sterling Brown wrote brilliantly about police brutality. In 1936, right? So let's make sure you acknowledge that, right? So you acknowledge
Right.
the Gwendolyn Brooks, you acknowledge Sterling Brown, Langston Hughes is all over the collect, like in the poem "The Talk," to dig and be dug in return. That's totally Langston, right? So Henry Dumas, the spirit of Henry Dumas animates and enriches the work, I hope. So these are some of the literary ancestors I claim, and they're definitely looking over my right.
Okay, can you repeat that again, Jabari? Because we had a little bit of some technical difficulties. We had some chopping.
Sure. Yeah, I'm writing with the idea that my ancestors are looking over my shoulder as I do it, right? And so I see myself very much as a descendant of a rich and vibrant tradition. So as I enter the room, if you imagine poetry as a room, and I'm entering it, with a new offering, a new variation of a ritual, then I have to pay homage to those spirits that guided me into that room in the first place.
And speaking of sources, some of these poems also were sourced from content, that chat rooms and discussions. And
Yeah.
how did you curate that?
I knew that, well, I'm interested in found poetry, right? And again, that comes from visual art. I was always fascinated by found art, people who, go through the alley and pick through things that I would walk past, and then they create something entirely new and illuminating from what they find. And so I wanted to do some of that. And again, it's the narrative combat. So police chat boards, police officers speak freely. It's pretty terrible stuff often. Really racist, violent, virulent, hateful stuff. And I thought it was important to include that in the narrative to say, not only am I advancing certain observations, but this is what I'm up against. This is what we're up against. So when the narrative says, for example, often after the killing of an unarmed black person, a police official will say, they say two things. One, we're going to investigate ourselves, right? And almost always when they investigate themselves, we know what the conclusion is, right? It was proper police procedure. The second thing they say is, we're going to restore trust with the African-American community. And there's an implication that trust once existed, whereas my argument is trust in that context is a violation of common sense, right? So at the same time, they're saying we're restoring trust, but on their own chat boards, they're saying really horrible things about us, right? So I thought it was important to quote directly from some of those internet chat rooms as part of the narrative.
You know what? And I'm glad you brought that up, because we're at this interesting point in history, right? Where we have to really be honest about this notion of the social contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that this social contract that exists between citizens and people on the police force is one that is to protect and serve. But when we look at the history, Black people, people of African descent who have been, descendants of enslaved folks, or even if you are not, I think what we've experienced in this country is like, if you've been relegated to the other, then that social construct, social contract has an asterisk by it.
Yep. Yeah.
And I like how your work really interrogates this whole notion of this social contract that is constructed between people of African descent and the police. So there's a poem that you have in this body of work about Barney Fife getting lost. And
I'm sorry, it broke. I didn't hear you, Shiraz.
okay, so which part did I break up on?
I heard lost, but I didn't hear what came before it.
Oh, you have a poem in this book about Barney Fife getting lost.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that poem and
Sure.
what was the inspiration behind it? Because quite honestly, it's one of those ones. It was another point of levity in the book, because just this image of Barney Fife And the dialogue that you have in this book is so expressive.
Right.
So let's get into that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I don't want to spoil the poem, as it were, but like you said, it's the title of it is Barney Fife Gets Totally Lost. So Barney Fife, is this this popular character from the Andy Griffith Show. He was this lovable, inept deputy, and I probably saw every episode of the Andy Griffith Show when I was growing up. So that there was there is in my mind this early image of this harmless um, cop who kept one bullet in his gun, and all of that. And I'm sort of wrestling with that and my own actual interactions with real life police officers, which bear no similarity to this lovable fictional character. So I did want to kind of address that conflict, but also, like you said, I really wanted some levity as well, because laughter is a form of resistance as well, right? So we have to create those opportunities, because we can become overwhelmed by, at least speaking for myself, my mission to tell the truth about our experience. But part of our experiences, we're fierce warriors, we're tireless strugglers and strivers, but we're also great at laughing. We're great at making music, right? So I wanted to give the reader a chance to take a break and laugh for a minute before I introduce them to some pretty serious material. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I also want to say that I appreciated your use of interrogate comment you made a while back, because that's definitely what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to ask questions, not necessarily provide answers. I like to pay attention and take notes. That's pretty much what I do as a writer. Chinua Achebe said, "Writers don't give prescriptions; they give headaches." So, I'm more likely to give a headache, but I'm wary of the reader going, "Tag, this is a lot of heavy stuff." I get that a lot because I write about race and social justice. It's impossible to avoid the gravity of many of these contexts, right? So at the same time, I want to push back against that with Black people's practiced and very adept use of levity.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. However, I do appreciate, just your way to be no holds barred about it, and to be very, as they say it plain.
Yeah,
Um, you you don't mince words in this at all, and I think that possibly has a lot to do with your history as a writer, being a journalist. And I want to switch gears a little bit just for us to dig into your history, because outside of going to that event that was put on by Left Bank Books, actually at the Central Library downtown, I knew you as a playwright. Well, I knew of you, as a playwright through people who you had worked with back in the day. And I remember telling Shirley LaFleur, the late Shirley LaFleur, that I had met you. And she just started going on and on and on about you. So, I just want to take this moment, since you are back home with us in a virtual kind of way, for the listening audience, just to get, some more foundation on who you are.
Sure. Like you say, born and raised in the North Side. Um, always lived in the shadow of Beaumont High School. That was my neighborhood, childhood and adulthood, until I left St. Louis. That's where I lived, right off of, like, near Natural Bridge and Vanderventer, that area. But I first connected with Shirley LaFleur. She was teaching at Harris Stowe, and my brother was taking a class from her. And he said, she's having this event at Sunshine Inn. And it was a night when Sunshine Inn was closed, and Rudy Nickens had opened the place up for this event. And Margaret Walker, the great writer, had agreed to read young people's work. Right. So my brother's like, you should bring your work. You should come, you should get critiqued by Margaret Walker. So I said, okay. So I put some stuff the bag. And then we get there with sunshine in, and the first woman shows her work to Margaret Walker, and she just destroys it. She just shreds it. She just eviscerates it. So I took my work off the table and quietly slid it back in my bag. I was not workshop that night, but I did get to meet Shirley LaFleur. So she had called a KO, Creative Arts Action Laboratory, and she said, "Oh, you should come to our workshop." So I started coming to her workshop, made some really good friends. We formed a group called the So What Performance Ensemble, and we would read around St. Louis. Around the same time, I had a poem accepted for publication in Black American Literature Forum, and the editor of that issue was Eugene B. Rettman, whom I had not met before. And he called me to accept the poem and said, "This is, it's a nice poem, and you're local, so you should come to Eugene B. Rettman Writers Club." So with my friend Ira Jones, I started going to their meetings too. So I was going to Shirley's meetings, I was going to Eugene's meetings, absorbing their wisdom and their kindness and their patience, and at the same time, doing poems. And then I began to do plays. So we did a number of plays in St. Louis that I wrote with my wife. And G. Taft Geddes wrote the music. We did that a number of times. And then with Ira Jones and Andrea Wren, I formed a series called New Voices, New Worlds that Chris mentioned. And we brought in all these talented young writers from all over the country. They would read at the Vaughn Cultural Center. Chris would bring the books. Then we'd have a reception afterwards at somebody's house, sometimes my house, sometimes someone else's house. And, we were very involved in the cultural scene in St. Louis back then. And it was really wonderful, and really laid the foundation for work I've been able to do since. But that's how I got started, just meeting the right people who were kind and generous. Shirley gave my wife and I our first television. She had an extra television. We were talking about something, and she heard us say that we didn't have. She said, "You don't have a television?" And she went to the closet. She had another television like sitting on the floor of her closet. She was like, "Just take that home. I can't believe you don't have a television." So there's a lot of people, who were kind to us that we owe a lot.
Yeah, and it's super important because a lot of people don't know on here, Jabari and I actually have a couple of things in common. We are both from North St. Louis. And, I came up under Shirley LaFleur as well. And it's just such a beautiful thing to share these things in common with you and to be of that type of lineage. So we are now getting into our Q&A piece of this conversation. So Shane, you can go ahead and take it away on how we would like to handle the Q&A.
Can Shane hear us?
Can Shane hear us?
Maybe not.
Shane, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay, everybody, you all are getting a sneak peek into the
Okay.
technical difficulties.
So I apologize that I might be on a little bit of a delay. So my sound stopped working on my. Oh, can you not hear me? Okay. Oh. Okay, so there's a lot of a delay.
Okay.
So yeah, the sound stopped working on my laptop, which I don't know how to explain that. But so I'm listening to the sound on my phone, which I got that hooked up. So this could be super fun. Shiraz, would you like it if I just sent you the questions?
Yes. Yes, we can do it that way.
And I love it. I do want to say, Shiraz, that everyone was very appreciative of your questions. And Jabari, thank you so much for the incredible reading. So I will turn the questions back over to you, Shiraz, and I'll let you ask some questions.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool. All
I'm
right.
going to hide myself again, but in the audience, type your questions in the comments.
Okay. So we'll be looking for questions to come through on the chat. So in the meantime, as we wait for the questions to come in, Jabari, um, let's just go back to the note that we were on about mentorship and how important do you feel that is for young poets and writers to really be nurtured and wrapped around, especially by elders?
Yeah, I think it's important, but like, again, for me, it comes back to that spirit of humility. Because I have gotten comments from time to time. People say, well, the elders were always really nice to you, right? They weren't as nice to me, or this sort of thing, and that's true. I mean, like from age 6 up to adulthood, there've always been mentors, usually African American mentors, usually teachers, who took me under their wing, at every level and said, let me help you. But I think, an important aspect of that was that I always approached them with humility, right? So Shirley and Eugene could have been my parents, right? In terms of their age. And I knew that. And also I'd done my homework and I knew what they had accomplished. So I went in the room. I was at an open mic one time where Eugene was the moderator, and he's kind and patient, and he was kind and patient, but there were a few people who didn't seem to realize his stature, and he handled that very, very gracefully. But I always came correct. I always tried to address these people as if I was speaking to my mother and father, right? And I think that kind of made them more willing, because they're very busy people making their own art, right? And you have to acknowledge that. So I think it's really important to try to establish those relationships with people who have gone before, but know who they are. Know whose footsteps you're walking in. I think that's just as important, and I think they're more inclined to help you if you make that acknowledgement.
Right.
So
it looks like we have our first question. Can you see it on the screen?
I can. That's pretty cool. What have you had to stop where you are now that you did not have to? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, if we can get that rephrased a bit. Silver Wayne House.
Hey, Silver.
Because as we get a new version of that question in, I am curious to know, how has this shelter in place quarantine phase we're in, how has that impacted your work?
Well, let me see. I'm a workaholic. I work all the time. And when I'm not at my laptop, I'm writing in my head. I'm writing on the backs of envelopes. And that's not necessarily a reflection of discipline, although I am a disciplined writer. I take it very seriously. I'm going to do it every day. But because the writing possesses me, right? And in some respects, I'm just being obedient and making sure that I honor it by writing it down, right? So that's a long way of saying I've been writing a lot during the quarantine, but I'm not the best person to ask, because I write all the time, right? I see another
So
question.
we're gonna mess around and get like a double album of a book coming after this.
Lots of stuff is coming. Trust me, lots of stuff is coming. Let's
Awesome.
see. Question from my old friend Cheryl. What inspired you to write children's books? I guess a couple of things. One was having children. My wife and I have 5 children. They're grown now, but also when I was an editor at the Washington Post Book Review, I was in charge of children's book coverage. So I receive children's books all the time. So I'm always reading children's books. I'm assigning them. I'm writing about them, and that kind of kept me in that mindset and made me very aware of what's out there. For example, and so I went from reading about them and critiquing them to writing them, and then I guess some of the early ones, like some of the board books for babies, for example, came from nonsense rhymes I would say to my children to get them to go to sleep, or to get them to take a bath, or do whatever it was they needed to do. Oh, say this, say that, make up a song, make up a rhyme. And so I did that all the time, every once in a while I do one, and my wife Liana would say, you know, that sounds like a book. Maybe you should write that one down. and
Yeah.
so and so it kind of grew from there. Yeah.
Okay. So we have our next question in. Jabari, what was your major prior to deciding to be a writer?
I was a political science major. I thought I would be a lawyer, maybe a civil rights lawyer. And then, that was fine. I wasn't unhappy, right? But then Gwendolyn Brooks came to my college, and she was there for 3 days. She did a 3-day residency, and I ended up skipping all my classes just to be wherever she was. And at the end of the 3 days, I changed my major to English because, seeing this living, breathing genius kind of did something to me, right? It was almost like a spiritual conversion, and I knew that's what I was supposed to do.
Right. And our
Let's.
next question is in.
What do you feel you have lost by leaving, and what have you gained? I think the main thing I've lost is being able to see my family, my biological family, on a regular basis, and friends. So I don't necessarily miss the place, but I do miss the people, right? And so I think that's when you move from one place to another. If you have had any kind of positive connection, that's often it. It's not the buildings or the institutions necessarily, it's the people, especially the people who were kind to you. And so that's what I missed the most. What have I gained? I guess, my world opened up, is much larger. I got exposed to many more writers and thinkers and places, and I got more opportunities too. Although I was fortunate in St. Louis, I had some nice opportunities while I was there. I was a native son, and I think the city and the community embraced me as such. So I'm grateful for that. Oh, this is Brooks. I know her. Okay. How are you processing the rest of America playing catch up around racial and is it playing into your writing? Uh, yeah, I have a piece in the New Republic right now, which I in the September issue of the New Republic. I have an essay. It's, I don't know, about 3 or 4,000 words, and that's one of the things that I address and will be addressing more extensively probably in my next collection of essays, which is in progress.
All right. And we have our next question, which I think is a really excellent question. What tips can you give parents on how to help their child in becoming writers?
Well, I mean, if they mean just in becoming better equipped to express themselves in writing, that's one thing. I think, beyond that, as far as, say, pursuing a career in writing or something like that, I think it often works best if writing chooses you, as opposed to you choosing writing. But for me, I mean, one reason I think that I gravitated toward it in the first place is because my parents surrounded me with books. Our house was absolutely full of books. And I wrote about that in an essay in We Can't Breathe. I have an essay in there about sort of inheriting my older siblings' books. I mentioned that one of my sisters, the younger of my two sisters, gave me my first adult novel to read because she was like, "I see you're really bored with that kid stuff, right? Why don't you try this thriller?" Right. So part of it was just kind of being immersed in that world. My father got me my first library card when I was 5 years old. I checked out books. So I also, through example, my kids always saw me with books. They always see my wife with books. We have thousands of books. It's almost unavoidable for them to, spend a lot of time with those books and then begin to express that, um, in terms of writing. So I would say example and opportunity. Just throw a lot of books at them. Don't necessarily say this is the book you should read, but give them, just make the books available and see what they gravitate toward, and then get more of same.
So we kind of scratched the surface a bit on there's a lot coming. Um,
Yeah.
and what do you feel like is next? What do you feel like needs to be added? And who needs to be added to the canon?
I think I'm a little hesitant about, discussions about canon.
Mhm.
because I think writers need to be, utterly dependent on readers, and I think readers
Mm,
get to make those decisions.
mm,
Um, I even feel, for example, when I get pushback from things that I write from people who weren't amazed by it, my inclination is not really to respond to that or challenge that, because I think I've had my opportunity to speak my piece in the writing, and I can't
right.
control how other people receive it. Some of them love it, some of them don't love it. I think either response is valid. I really want to trust the reader's own judgment and not try to impose my will. I come in the spirit of humility. This is an offering. You can accept it or you can reject it. And I feel the same way about discussions of canon. We can create an anthology and we should say this is the canon. And then there's a woman at the library who's choosing entirely different books because nothing in that canon appeals to her. Is she wrong? I don't think so.
Right. So I want to thank you so much for being in conversation with me this evening. It is a complete and total honor
Oh, it's great.
to be with you in this moment. And I just want to say thank you to Chris and Shane and Left Bank Books for giving me this opportunity.
No,
So
thank you. Terrific questions. I really appreciate it.
thank you,
Uh,
Jabari.
Thanks to both of you. Are you able to hear me? I know we've had some, difficulties. Shane is, I'm kind of stepping in for Shane because his lag time is apparently just undoable. I know, thank you both so much. I thought the questions were terrific. I have one more, and since I have the floor, I'm going to ask it, and then we'll wrap up. And what my question is that Jabari, Robert Pinsky called your poems documentary in the best sense, and I was wondering, and I know Shiraz, you did ask, guys talked about that, but I was wondering about in the context of interpreting events to young people who are maybe experiencing these poems in their own lives or in the media, or both. Like,
I lost you for a minute.
how I was asking about these poems in the context of interpreting them, events to young people, for young people who are experiencing the poems in their own lives or in the media or both.
What is my, I'm sorry. What do I say?
Just kind of, just that the poems being documentary, in the best sense, like young people, it just struck me what maybe like teenagers, particularly Black teenagers, reading these poems, but not necessarily just Black, how they might, have you thought about what kind of power or purpose they might have in like being almost stand-ins for what people are exposed to in the media, how the media is telling them these stories and how they are experiencing them in their own lives?
Yeah, I guess, I want them to understand that their value or their version of events is as valid as anyone else's, right? And to
Mm-hmm.
question authority, always question the official story, right? And I think that's the main thing. I want them to, you know, my life revolves around stories. They're really important to me. But I encounter all stories with a degree of healthy skepticism. I want to be able to pick it up and turn it over and look at the underside and maybe put it in the center of the room and circle it and see it from all perspectives. And I would hope that they would look at these poems as just part of a larger discussion of these events. There's the official version, there's the eyewitness versions, and then there's the artists, the painters, the poets, the dancers, who are going to filter these events through their own particular perspectives, express them through their own particular disciplines. And that's also a way that young people can respond to these events too, through their own art, by making art in whatever form.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you. And thank you both again for doing this event. please, folks out there, this will be available for sharing once it gets up in about 24 hours on our Facebook and on our website. The books are available on our website, folks. Please support these great authors, both of them. And Shane, thanks you. I'm sorry he can't be on to thank you for himself.
Thanks,
but,
Shane. Thank you. Thank you.
Take
Yeah.
care, everybody,
you.
and be safe out there.
Thank you.